you went to high school in McKinney, college at UNT, and then started your career in the 1960s.
1960s, that's right.
A time of turbulence and chaos similar to what we have now. So can you talk a little bit about the similarities between the chaos in the 60s and what we're dealing with now?
Okay, I lived through both. Or I am living through this one, and I lived through the chaos of the 60s. I was in high school during the time that, of course, the Vietnam War, and that caused a lot of the upheaval that we had at the time. And then when I got in college, of course, we had the assassinations. The civil rights movement was going on, so we had Dr. Martin Luther King, who was doing great work, and then all at once he was assassinated. And the assassination of Bobby Kennedy, and while I was in high school, the assassination of our President, John Kennedy. So if you compare yesterday with today, I think it was worse then than now. I really do. Now, what makes it seem worse now is we have more communication and more media. It's 24/7, you can turn it on anytime, and you can hear polarized people arguing about something. So as far as the violence is concerned, there's not nearly as much today. Now, there's violence in words, and there's incivility all over the place. Civility is almost nil in America today. But back in those days, people were violent in many cases. Now, Dr. King wanted a peaceful movement. So because of that, he managed to keep it as peaceful as possible. But when I got in college and I was doing an internship with a company that I worked for, I had the opportunity to commute to Washington on different occasions, and the parks would be disturbed up there. They would be wrecked. It was just awful. And then when I was in graduate school, I taught 2 first-year student classes. I believe the word freshman is no longer available to use in our culture, but we call them first-year students now. So I was teaching first-year students because I was in graduate school, and I had a small office. And when I would go home every night, the administration of North Texas told us to pack everything that was valuable because the next day the school may be totally burned. So, I mean, all colleges were on the alert, and they had people die and fires and so forth at Kent State in Ohio at the time. So because of that, we all had to react all over. It was a time when we really weren't sure if we would come out of it. People were so polarized, people were so angry, either pro-Vietnam or negative Vietnam. It was affecting the political spectrum. In fact, if you have been to LBJ's ranch, have you been to the updated LBJ ranch? I was down there a few years ago, and it shows the furniture and everything that they had. Lady Bird had lived there earlier, and then they saved the furniture, and then they've restored it back to what it was during his presidency and vice presidency. But it is amazing to look at his dining room. Everybody else had their formal dining chairs where they had meals. But if you look at LBJ's chair, he had a small den at the end of his dining room, and he had 3 TV sets. And his chair had rollers on it. And all during his meal, he rolled so he could see each television set, because the media just were tearing him up because of the Vietnam War. I don't see a whole lot of difference today. It's just the volume of it. I have researched Dr. Martin Luther King. I have gone his route. I have gone to Selma. I have gone to the Ebenezer Baptist Church in Atlanta. I have gone to the Lorraine Motel, where they now have a museum for the civil rights movement. I have followed and saw the marching and saw the sacrifice and read about the sacrifice that went on during that time. And I remember the night when an African-American friend and I were driving home from an event at the University of North Texas, and they came on to tell us that Dr. Martin Luther King had been assassinated. So all those times are indelibly imprinted in my mind. But today, it's a very different time, but simply it's the media coverage, and we know that we came out of that, and we will come out of this, but to a very different world, and we'll probably go into that. Okay?
So how did you get started in business for yourself, And was there a particular turn in your career to direct you into your specialty, and what motivated you to become a futurist?
Okay. Why I'm this weird person that I am? Okay. What caused that? It's really funny if you're at an occasion in the afternoon, maybe just, getting together, and people ask me what I do, and I tell them I'm a futurist, and they say, oh. And then they start waltzing away. Well, nice to meet you. So anyway, they don't even ask me to explain. But it is actually a career. And before I got into it, mostly major corporations were doing this. IBM was doing it, HP, and so forth. But mostly it was in larger corporations. And I really didn't know at the time that's really what one called it, because a lot of them were called strategists or, far visionary thinkers or whatever. But I always wanted to be a speaker. Ever since I was in the first grade and they let me play a greeting card. They were needing speakers for a PTA meeting, and they called me and told me I could wear, this cardboard card, and they made it look like a greeting card, and I could greet the people from the stage. And I just really liked that for some reason. I don't know. And so that made me want to be a speaker. So all the way through school, I did everything possible. But back then, there were women's careers and there were men's careers. So I decided that to do that, probably it would be a teaching position, or maybe in sales, something like that. So went on through school, and then Naomi Press, we have the Naomi Press Elementary School here in McKinney, came to me one day and said, I think I'm entering you in a speech contest. I said, oh my goodness. I said, I don't know about that. That makes me nervous. I'm a little farm girl from north of town out there, and I don't say a whole lot. I enjoy it, but I don't say a whole lot. She said, well, we'll get you all beefed up. And so she worked with me after school. She entered me. Well, she'd already entered me. She more or less told me she had. And so anyway, she and another man by the name of Lyman Robinson, I'm not sure some of you know him, sat with me after school every day and drilled me. And I memorized everything I could think of. I memorized the inaugural speech of John Kennedy. I had done everything I could do, and then we picked things that I would enter the contest. And so for some reason we went to region, and that turned out well. And then they said, well, we think we'll go to state with you. So we went to state. So I got state. And so anyway, so we started doing that, and I really did begin to like it. And then another man by the name of Harold Frazier would coach me also. And so it's your teachers. They notice something in you that you love, a thrill, and then they would be willing to work night and day to make sure this little farm girl got the timidity out of her to get on stage and to do something. So then I went on to college, and I told my parents I wanted to be a professional speaker, and they went, what? We're barely making tuition. You want to do this? And I said, well, I think it could be a career. And they said, well, it's not. Mother said, just go to work for the phone company and forget it. So anyway, thought I'd make a good telephone operator. I like to talk, back then they called in and you could hook them up to the different things. So anyway, I went on, and that dream was still sort of with me, but there really wasn't a definite, I guess a definite route to be a speaker, but it was always in my heart to do that. Then I started working at a corporation that had a Toastmasters club. In those days it was segregated. It was Toastmistress and Toastmasters. So one day they were having a speech contest, and so they asked me to enter, and so then that started working out real well, and we got to the international level. And then, judges would call and different things would happen. And I had a speech I had dreamed up and won with, and it was called Give Yourself Permission to Win. It was 5 or 6 minutes long. And it was so much fun to give that, I decided to make up brochures and start knocking on doors there in Dallas, the big corporations, to see if they would like for me to come spend 6 minutes telling them how to win. And so most of them said, no, not really. In fact, I went to one major corporation, and I went in and told him that I had this, very cheap brochure. I didn't call it that, but I handed him my brochure and said, give yourself permission to win on it. And I said, I know you're a great women's cosmetic sales organization. This is being taped, right? Okay, we
Yes.
don't use company names. So anyway, the man looked at me and he said, I have an egg timer here. And so he turned the egg timer up and said, before the sand spills out, you tell me why I need you instead of Miss America. And so my answer was, you got me. If you can get her, I'd take her. Anyway, he did take her. I went on and just kept trying. I went to the car and I thought, this is a bummer of an idea. I just don't think you're going to make it with your red and brown cheap printed brochure and so forth. I think I need somebody maybe to help me sell me, because I'm really big, believe it or not, rather shy about selling anything that has to do with my own self. And I thought, this is not going to work. So I hired PR people and sales people, and they got me packaged and so forth. And by then I decided to quit my day job, but I still needed money. I was married, but my husband, said very well he would foot the bills if I wanted to get started. And I told him, no, I needed to do my own thing. So somebody asked me if I'd ever heard of life insurance, and I told them, yeah. And they said, well, why don't you come sell it? And I said, I don't know how to sell life insurance. They said, give us 6 weeks, you'll know. I said, oh, okay. Can I work nights? And they said, okay. So I quit my day job as a consultant in a major corporation in Dallas, and went to work selling life insurance at night. Wasn't long. For some odd reason, I enjoyed myself. I made the $1 Million Club and went right on. Of course, mostly Ray, my husband, bought most of that. But anyway, it gets recognition no matter how you do it, I guess. But so anyway, we got that started, and I stayed in that for 4 years. I built up that business, and I got to meet a lot of people. And then, again, I was in Toastmasters, and finally, won on a fairly high level. So I thought to myself, when they, I was thinking, if I get the award, I'm going to do something that probably they wouldn't like for me to do, but I'm going to do it anyway. So after they gave me the award for winning the speaking contest, I looked at the audience, and there were thousands of people there because it was an international conference. I said, if you like what you heard today, then I will be willing to give this to you anywhere in the world if you will pay my expenses for the next 6 months. I will make this offer. Well, people started calling, believe it or not. And I started going and doing all kinds of fun things. And so that got that started. And then it was still mostly motivational speaking. And then I was motivating IBM one day. And then they kept calling me back. And then, this was in 1983 by now, they told me, they said, we need to talk with you. And I said, okay. They said, we are doing something rather interesting in our company. They said, something strange is happening to IBM. And I said, what is it? And they said, it's called competition. We've never experienced that before. So probably, they said, in fact, not probably, but most assuredly, probably we're going to have to, they didn't use the word downsize in those days, they used the word layoff. And it said we're going to have to lay off about 100,000 people. And with that, we would like to help our people to know how to live with or without IBM. Because until then, IBM stood for I've been moved. And as long as you could move, you had a job with IBM as long as you were legal and didn't do anything to aggravate the company or and went by the rules. So this would be the first time, and they were getting in gear for that. So they had me do research and come up with all kinds of things about the future and read books and so forth. And of course, I'm always in for a deal. And I got to thinking, sometimes I check this out with Ray, sometimes I don't. But this time I didn't. And so I told IBM, I said, I'll tell you what I'll do. I said, I won't charge you for the time on the research, but if you will pay me simply for my contact time with your people as we go around doing the coaching and the speaking, then I will work that way with the understanding that you will release all the research to me and I write a book. And so they said, well, it's a deal, because they probably thought, yeah, right, she's going to do that. Mm-hmm. So, well, they did, I did. And any of you been following the Dallas City Council races over the last few years? Anybody know Candy Evans, who ran for Dallas City Council. You know her. She's in Preston Hollow there in Highland Park. Anybody in real estate in here? Do you ever read Candy's Dirt? Okay, that's Candy. Candy was my PR person. And she told me, she said, I think we can do something with this book. Can you put something together? And I said, yes. She said, there is original publisher in Austin, and I think he'll probably take your book. He's looking for something unusual. I think that was the kind word, looking for something weird. So I think, we can get it in. And so I put it together, wrote the first chapter, did everything, I drove down there, made my sales spiel, and he did take the book. Then I hired a full-time salesperson and PR person, and then other full-time people to try to get the book out, because I was a first-time author and they don't do a whole lot for first-time unknowns. So you have to do it for yourself. So you have to be willing to fund that. So I got a lady that could sell ice to an Eskimo. She would call anybody, do anything, and I was just going around everywhere, doing everything, talking to major corporations, being on major TV shows. In fact, I guess a poignant experience for me, a couple of the poignant experiences were when I walked into Republic Studios in Hollywood to do a morning show. I remember, of course, in my day, there were the cowboy and cowgirl movies were on the movie screen, and it was just, and all of them would say at the bottom, mostly, Gene Autry and all those would say filmed at Republic Studios. And so when I walked in, I remember seeing posters of those singing cowboys there. Of course, this would have been in the mid-'80s. And I thought, how did that farm girl, who until 4th grade had not been over 100 miles from McKinney, get there? But it's with the people that believe in you, it's your teachers, it's with all the people who wanted to do that. And so we went around, and then, of course, when you write books, they market you. And so it got out, and I got a call from Kiplinger. And anybody remember the Kiplinger Washington letter? Knight Kiplinger and so forth up there. We got a call from the Kiplingers there on K Street in Washington. And he said, why don't you come on up? I'd like to interview you. So I went up in the cab, a very hot day, parked my luggage with the secretary, and said, Mr. Kiplinger wants to see me. So I went in and did an interview, and we had a very nice day. And then he called in the editor of the Kiplinger Financial Magazine and said, I want you to meet Marjorie White, and she's going to take you to the Congressional Bookstore because we have put your book in the Congressional Bookstore here in Washington. And so you go over there and we'll sign and do some things. And I was going, oh my gosh. Then it went back again. How can the farm girl, So then that was October-ish or whatever, and then the November issue. Of course, it comes out every week, but the November issue came out. My husband said, have you read the November issue this time? I said, no. And so he said, look at it, and it was one of the 4 business book picks of 1986. That went all over, and because of that, then people started calling, and the editor called me, not the editor, but the publisher from Austin called me. He said, I can't keep up. I don't know, the book is just going everywhere. So it made bestseller lists. It was bestseller, so forth. Pardon?
Which book?
Okay, it was called Strategies 2000. And what we were doing, this was written in 1985, came out in 1986, and it was calling what would be happening in the year 2000. And with that, people were interested in doing that. And then a lot of corporations wouldn't buy the book because I was saying in the book that if you're an employee, start looking out for yourself, because there's going to come a time when you won't be guaranteed a job. Well, the corporate world, in many cases, did not want the book in their company because they didn't really want their employees to understand that this was what was happening. But again, IBM had let me have all this information, and I used IBM as a bellwether. If you're in futurism, you get bellwethers. It's things you watch and you know things will follow to be like them. So I knew that that would be coming, so I said that. And I began to think that I'm going to say this, and so I was very bold in the book. One company stepped forward, and that company, under the auspices of Jack Welch, stepped forward. It was called GE. GE Capital stepped forward. And it said, what we're going to do is use your book when we hire people. And then we're going to use your book when we fire people. And see how litigations go. Because people were being sued right and left. In fact, in those days, it became dangerous to use the word career in an interview because it could construe some kind of longevity with the company. That's, of course, 1985 was getting to be kind of an interesting change in America. Then we had, of course, the great competition with the Japanese. So, with that said, then GE Capital did the test and they found that their litigations went to zero because they told them up front and they told them out back and they didn't have any grounds to stand on. So we started getting all sorts of offers and that got me started. And so we started doing one thing after the other and traveling and doing things. And that's how I got started. Very long story.
That was good. That checked off a couple of
Yeah,
So, why did you decide to write books? Okay, have you had any unusual or adventurous client experiences? And I'm thinking about the one where they took you in the cab.
Oh, okay. The big secret mission?
Yes.
Well, the government still does this, and they did it back then. They've always done it. They pull in weird people to see what they're thinking so they can try to counter weird people. And so the lady who was taking the calls, marketing and so forth, got a call, and it was the Department of Defense calling in, and they wanted me to come up on a mission for the Department of Defense. And what I was to know is that I would come up and then I would be taken to Fort George Meade. And after that I wouldn't know anything else. And so, of course, I love adventures. I mean, I love to ride the rapids on rivers. I like to do all kinds of fun things. And I thought, oh my gosh, I grew up on the Hardy Boys and Nancy Drew. This is going to be the real life thing. So my husband Ray, long ago, he said, oh well. In fact, I need to go back just a little bit because he kind of cut my apron strings when we first started because when they first got me, when I was on my first book tour, my first gig was at a 4:30 newscast in New Orleans in the French Quarter. And so they told me, they said, you're going to have to watch when you have to walk over some people that, you may or may not want to make friends with on your way. And so it's kind of dangerous. So I told Ray, I said, just this once, could you take off work and go with me down there and maybe you could help me get to that station? And I said, that's an awfully early because, I had to be there really early. And he said, well, I don't know, I'll try. So I thought about it and I thought, surely he's going to do this. So he came in a couple of days later and he said, I have a surprise for you. And I just knew that was Southwest Airlines tickets in there. I thought, he's got a surprise. He's going to go with me on that trip and that's Southwest Airlines tickets and he's going to show them to me. So I quickly opened the bag and inside was a flashlight. And I thought, I got the message. I am on my own. And from then on, not ask anymore. And believe it or not, I got on the plane with a flashlight in those days. And I took my flashlight and made it just fine. And we have been to all sorts of things. Well, so then, roll many, many years later. And I was in the hotel and I was waiting. I had my attaché in those days, the large attaché, with a presentation in it, because I understood it was supposed to present something to someone. So I looked out, nobody was there, and people were, it was late. And I thought, the government late? They can't be late. So I looked out, and there was a gray unmarked car. So I thought, well, I better take a chance and go out. So I went out, and in that unmarked car was a driver, and he rolled down the glass, and he said, are you Carolyn Corbin? I said, yes, I am. And then he said, do you have to take any kind of restroom break or anything? I said, well, it's kind of personal. I haven't met you yet. But anyway, no, I don't. I said, there's an attaché lying in, and it was a very trustworthy time. I said, I also left my purse in there. It's right there. I can see it. I said, I'll go get them. He said, get in the car, and once you get in the car, we cannot stop for anything. So he said, you are the property of the United States government right now, you cannot stop. So we went in this unmarked car and then went down into this dark place at Fort George Meade, and it was very dark under there, and I won't say anymore. And so anyway, then I went into a clearing room and everything got cleared, but I think I had pretty well been inspected before we went up there, because some clients had called and said, somebody's calling to see about you. I'm not sure exactly what's up. But I said, oh, I'm not sure what's up either. But anyway, so I went down, and 2 people guided me to the stage. But before I went in, they brought a configuration of the stage, because they said you're going to be blinded while you're working. And so you can't see, so you're going to have to touch your visuals, move them. So with remote control. Keys, knobs. So I memorized that, and I went in there and went down, did my thing. They interviewed, did whatever needed to be done. The answers were heard, and I was taken back out. I was then given my attaché case and purse, which they held everything, and they went through everything. Then I was put back in the unmarked car, and again could not stop until I got back to the hotel. I then got my luggage, went home, and never knew where I'd been.
You couldn't see a soul
Couldn't see a soul.
in the audience?
No. But, I could see shadows, and it was a big room, a lot larger than this. And, there were shadows in there, full. And then later on, we were at a dinner series in Dallas with my husband's company, and a lady spoke, and she was a double spy during World War II, and she told about the handoffs for the spies and how they worked and how they got in gray unmarked cars to make their deliveries and so forth. And I thought, been there, done that. And I began to understand. I probably spoke to the NSA. So, and that's probably who it was. And they are stationed, I believe, at Fort George Meade. So I think that's what it was, but it was many, many years before I put that together, but all the knowledge I had. And now that I know what I know, and things are much more open, they talk to sci-fi authors, they talk to futurists and so forth all the time, trying, thank goodness, to stay ahead of what somebody may be thinking or doing. And so that's good to know, but I've been a part of that, so I feel honored to have been able to do that. Go ahead.
What was it like growing up in McKinney, and to what extent does your McKinney heritage influence you?
Oh, McKinney. Growing up in McKinney was wonderful. I mean, I can't think of a better Norman Rockwell town to have grown up in. It was just anything you could dream of. I mean, playmates, parents, teachers, our education system. In fact, I started writing books with nothing but my high school English knowledge and my college English knowledge. And when I got to college, I didn't learn anything new. I may have read some new literature or something that was assigned because the teachers were so good here. I mean, most of the schools are named after some of my teachers. Lizzie Nell McClure, Ruth Dowell, Naomi Press. I mean, you name it. I mean, those teachers were so good. And I've mentioned it before. They worked with me. They, and they were willing to do that. They did that with everybody. It wasn't just me. It just happened to be, I took it to heart. It affected me. And I imagine if you ask anybody that graduated from here with me in the older days, they would say the same thing about their teachers and about growing up here. The town was youth-centric. We could have our own newspaper columns. We could, anytime anybody got anything, they made a big deal about it. And then we had Bluebird's Campfire Horizon Club. And in Horizon Club, they made us think it was probably a sorority. They didn't tell us any different. We thought we belonged to a sorority. We didn't get out of town much. We didn't know the difference anyway. And so then they told us we were going to debut. Oh, we're debutantes. Something like that, yes. So they took us down to the Baker Hotel in Dallas and had the full ceremony and brought in the assistant editor, maybe an editor at the time, Val M. was her name. And they treated us totally. Our dads escorted us, our dates escorted us the rest of the way. They gave flowers and the whole thing. We thought we were on top of the world. And then your Kiwanis and Lions and Rotary and all the clubs had all kinds of awards for the kids. We were welcome at the meetings anytime. They let us come speak, made us feel as if we were adults. When I went to college, I felt I could compete with anybody. And you know, McKinney prepared us to compete with anybody. They prepared us to compete with anybody in the world. And they can do that. So I owe them a great debt of gratitude. Okay.
And what are your thoughts on the changing role of civic engagement and the impact of that change on communities and the people who live and work in them?
Civic engagement. Well, I was looking at the number of votes that we've had in the primary. It looks like there's probably been about, 2 million votes cast totally. And how many registered voters do we have? Something like 15 to 16 million in the state of Texas. So what is that, around 13%? And I was just so excited. And then I stepped back and thought, I'm excited because 13% of the people are voting, which is probably more than most places. So we can give ourselves a good grade there, but at the same time, you know, it's such an opportunity and such a blessing to live in America where we have all of our freedom and the ability to participate in government and the ability to vote. I can't imagine why we couldn't just get up and get out. Well, I think part of it is that we don't understand government anymore. Part of it is that perhaps people are not interested anymore. They're interested in their work. They're interested in other things. They feel too busy. But I do feel that we need to make a concerted effort in getting more involvement and more civic involvement. And as we study generations, for the first time that I have ever known, we're going to have 6 generations living together. It was pretty optimal when we had 4 generations living together. We're getting ready to start having 6 generations living together. We need to understand one another. We need to learn to work together. We need to learn to do life together. But we need to understand there is a difference in the goals and ambitions of each different generation. So what seems just wonderful to me to be defined as civically engaged or belong to civic clubs and organizations, the next generation or two may look back and say, I don't want to do it that way. I want to be engaged, but I want to do it in a different way. We're talking now in the Chamber of Commerce, and we have talked through Leadership McKinney. Many of you who have been through that know that we're moving in McKinney to McKinney 4.0. And that puts us on a global capacity. And that's the book. That's our last book. And it's called Community Leadership 4.0, Impacting a World Gone Wiki. And that's a whole different world that we're moving toward. That book, I don't know if you know that because y'all helped me put that together. That book was chosen by the Prime Minister's office in the country of Malaysia as the book pick of the month of March in 2013. The next month, in April of 2013, they picked Ray Kurzweil's book, How to Make a Mind, I think is the name of it. And he is the Director of Engineering at Google. So we're up there, your leadership program, and the things that you are learning, and McKinney moving to 4.0 is right up there with what's happening in the world with the driverless cars and all of the other things that are going on there. Now, there are many things that we have talked about in leadership. There are many things that have come up since we have been with leadership. And also, the book has been, and I'm not sure if it continues to be or not, it's in a graduate public affairs course at California State University. And there's several other universities and so forth that are using the book. So we're looking at, in the chamber, how to be McKinney 4.0, because we're a 3.0 moving to 4.0 now. That's going to demand civic engagement, an innovative culture, a lot of other things that we have trained and we have talked about in there. Because if we don't keep up, we will get behind. And when we get behind, it's going to be difficult to catch up. So we're doing well now. And that's what we want to continue to do. So civic engagement, involvement of businesses, recruitment of businesses with an agenda which is socially prominent and acceptable. All those things need to be planned, and we need to target what we need to do, and we need to have done it yesterday. So the time is now to get started.
Well, one last question here before I open it up to all of you. How do you think that these changes that you just mentioned will shape leaders in the future?
Well, the leader of the future will be totally different than the leader of the past. In fact, a good leader of the past may or may not be a good leader in the future. And you know, you helped me put together some of the things that we needed to do, but to make McKinney a 4.0, which will keep up with all the 4.0s, the others that are in the world, you need to do 5 things as a leader. And the first thing you need to do is begin within. And you need to be socially intelligent. You need to understand yourself. A lot of leaders have no idea who they are. And they have no idea about themselves. They have no idea what makes them tick. And they're just out there. So you have to begin within, and you have to know how to work with people. You have to know how to interact with people. You have to know how to read body language, all kinds of things. You have to understand the humanness that we all have. Number 2, you have to know how to imagine the future. You need to review the past, because if we don't, it could repeat itself in a different way, but the principles could repeat themselves. But there are certain skills that one needs to conquer the future, and most people don't have those skills because they're new skills. And one of the things is your experience may not help you at all. In fact, it may hurt you. So we have to learn to define weak signals. We have to learn to do creative thinking, all sorts of things. And then learn to make a decision and feel good about that decision and test it out to see if it works. And sometimes we make mistakes. And then we have to start over. We have to learn to correct. So leadership in the future is going to be so totally different. So that's the second step, is to imagine the future. The third is to learn how to think. We're going to talk a little bit later on the education topic when we go back into Leadership McKinney. And the education topic has to be so different. Teaching people to memorize and regurgitate no longer gets it. We have to teach people to think about things they have never experienced before and draw an image from that as if you were living it. And that takes a very, very, very special visioning skill. The fourth thing you have to do is to learn to harness chaos. And we're in that right now. Now, when we were talking about this a few years ago, when we were in Leadership McKinney, it seemed like, oh, we're never going to have this kind of chaos. Yes, we're going to have this kind of chaos because we're in this kind of change. Chaos is the first stage of change, and the first thing you do inside chaos is to try to go back to what's comfortable. So they call it polarization. So if you've looked ahead and say, okay, if I make this change, then we're going to have chaos, and the people are going to do this, then I get out ahead of it as a leader, and I know exactly how to remedy all that. But most leaders haven't studied it, so they have no idea. So you harness the chaos, and finally, you manage the conflict. All this is predictable. Leaders who know how to do that will be the great leaders of the future.
Step by step.
Right, decent.
Any parting words or challenges for this audience, considering who they are? They are
Well,
rare but the few.
I am just really proud of each of you, and proud to know you, because it's such an opportunity to have grown up in McKinney, lived in Dallas for all those years, and come back to slow down a bit and then be able to work alongside all of you. It's the American dream, I think, that's such a concern these days. Well, let me just tell you something. The American dream is alive and well. What has happened to the American dream is it has become the global dream. We've been emulated. Back when I was having my American dream, being what I wanted to be, doing what I wanted to do, be as odd as you want to, be, just be yourself, and there'll be something for you if you're willing to work for it and strategize and get out there and do it. That dream was in America at the time because we were recovering from World War II. And we were just about the only game in town in many ways because the other nations, civilized nations, were regrouping and rebuilding. But now they've regrouped, they've rebuilt, and they can then emulate what we have, the parts of what we have that they want to emulate. And so the American dream has gone global. And China, even though it's communistic, is harnessing a lot of the American dream for its people, and its people are getting excited. The more social media that's freed up in China, the more its 1.3 billion people will compete with us on a level we have never met before. So the American dream is alive and well, the global dream is alive and well, and there's going to be tremendous competition. And in that competition, some little spark that I'm beginning to see is that then we're going to have automation getting more sophisticated, technology more sophisticated and in higher speed. And with all that working together, we're going to have to work very hard to keep our jobs. And we're going to have to constantly be learning and relearning and spending our lifetimes learning. The job force eventually may be cut in half, workforce. Now, some people will move on to other things, but this is the first time in history that in many cases, what you would have moved on to can be replaced with artificial intelligence or machine learning. So that's something new we need to talk about. The American dream is alive and well, but we're going to have to work very hard for it because the rest of the world is working for the American dream too. So, thank you.
Thank you. I'm looking at this side of the room because I know so many of the people in the current class are over here. You have questions? Anybody over here? Start on that side so that you can go on. Anybody else have a question for Carolyn? Great, go ahead.
I'll just speak loudly. So you mentioned earlier the word spark and how it can impact the future. What are the things that you are seeing today that are the spark that may change the future versus something that just goes away?
Okay. I call them percolators. Or sparks or whatever. It's just something that's barely on the horizon out there. You may see those, for instance, the television, before it was invented, was on the horizon for years and years and years. I was working at a corporation developing the computer to be used in the classroom in 1969. And so a lot of things are percolating very, very, very early. So we start looking back to see what was percolating then, and we look forward then to see what's percolating now. I think the major thing that's been percolating all along is just what I have mentioned. I don't think we fully grasp what's going to happen with technology, sophistication, and speed in the future. And I don't think we fully grasp how unprepared we are for it, not only in the education area, but also in the defense area. While we're working with nuclear weapons and biological and chemical weapons and so forth, there is somebody somewhere working on how to destroy our electric grid digitally. Splash in the world out there, in outer space. That would destroy our way of life as we know it. And some scientists tell us would destroy 95% of the American population in 1 year. So there's a lot that we need to be doing and paying attention to that I don't think we are at this time, but I think it's just the technological advances. We're going to talk about it a little bit in education now, but unless we're a university that can create curriculum and turn it in a 3-month period of time, we're not going to be in business someday. Innovation is happening so rapidly, and it takes too long to create curriculum to support the innovation that the employees or the people are never going to, unless we can turn it in 3 months, and there is an organization beginning to do that. If you can turn it in 3 months, then you can keep up with the innovation pretty well. So that's the main thing. Another thing I call is a rolling discombobulation. Everything is going to be disrupted. Everything that we know, whether it's how we do church, how we do education, how we do business, how we do school, how we do whatever, is going to be disrupted. 15 years from now, we will not know the world in which you and I live today. So we think things are disrupted now. It's just, and how do we live and come out of constant disruption? In other words, everything we know is going to be reinvented, and it must be reinvented. And the big deal is we have competition, and the real spark is China. China is trying to be the #1 military in the world and the #1 economy in the world, and in some categories it already is the #1 economy in the world, even though we still are #1 in technology. But they are on our heels at this point, and that will change our lifestyle tremendously.
One more, that was a good question.
Yes, it was.
Hard to follow. That's it.
Anything else? Okay. Thanks a lot. We appreciate it.